November 20th, 1942. The North African sun beat down mercilessly on the makeshift testing ground outside Tobruk, where Oberst Friedrich Kühn stood beside a captured American vehicle that would challenge everything he believed about German engineering superiority. The Willys MB sat there, dust-covered and abandoned, its olive-drab paint scorched by desert heat. Around him, 5 Wehrmacht technical officers waited, notebooks ready, their expressions mixing curiosity with skepticism. They had been told by Berlin's propaganda ministry that American equipment was inferior, mass-produced garbage churned out by a nation more concerned with profits than precision. Yet something about this vehicle troubled Kühn. In recent weeks, Allied reconnaissance units had been appearing everywhere, coordinating with a speed that suggested mobility far exceeding anything the Wehrmacht possessed. British long-range desert groups penetrated hundreds of kilometers behind German lines with impunity. American forward observers maintained contact with artillery batteries across impossible distances. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Jeep's capture had occurred 3 days earlier during a skirmish near the coastal road. An American reconnaissance patrol, caught by surprise by a panzer column, had abandoned their vehicles and fled into the wadis. Standard procedure dictated destroying captured equipment or leaving it behind, but Major Hans Zimmermann, commanding the reconnaissance battalion that had captured the Jeep, had other ideas. He had seen too many of these vehicles, operating in conditions that should have immobilized them, to dismiss them as American incompetence. Zimmermann approached Oberst Kühn with careful formality. "Sir, permission to begin the examination?" Kühn nodded. "Proceed. Berlin wants a complete assessment within 72 hours. The Wehrmacht High Command is particularly interested in propulsion systems and load capacity." The first officer, Hauptmann Werner Schmidt, a mechanical engineer from the Daimler-Benz technical division before the war, opened the hood. What he saw stopped him mid-motion. The engine compartment was immaculate, not in the sense of being clean. 3 years of desert warfare made cleanliness impossible, but in its organization. Every component was accessible. Hoses were color-coded, bolts were standardized. A diagram mounted inside the hood panel showed maintenance points with simple illustrations that any soldier could follow. Schmidt called over the others. "Look at this. The entire engine can be accessed without special tools. Everything uses standard wrenches." He pointed to the air filter. "This can be removed and cleaned in less than 2 minutes. Our Kübelwagens require 15 minutes and partial disassembly. The Go Devil engine displaced 134 cubic inches and produced 60 horsepower at 4,000 revolutions per minute. By German engineering standards, this was crude. The Kübelwagen's air-cooled engine was more sophisticated, more efficient, more elegant in its design. Yet, as Schmidt examined the American engine, he began to understand something that troubled him deeply. "This engine isn't designed to be perfect," he said slowly. "It's designed to be maintainable. Look at these components. They're built with tolerances that allow for field repair without precision tools." He removed a spark plug with a standard wrench. In our vehicles, spark plug access requires specialized extensions. Here, everything is within easy reach. Lieutenant Hans Müller, a logistics officer who had spent the past year managing vehicle maintenance for the 21st Panzer Division, examined the engine more closely. His experience with field repairs made him particularly interested in what the Americans had created. The cylinder head is cast iron, crude compared to our aluminum alloys, but it's nearly indestructible. You could repair this with a hammer and basic welding equipment. The examination moved to the transmission. What they discovered deepened their concern. The Jeep had 4-wheel drive, engageable through a simple transfer case that any driver could operate. Kühn had driven Kübelwagens extensively. He knew their limitations. Despite their sophisticated portal gear rear hubs and limited slip differentials, they were rear-wheel drive only. In soft sand, they required careful driving and often became stuck. Heavier vehicles followed where lighter ones had packed the sand, but the first vehicle through virgin desert was always vulnerable. "Demonstrate the four-wheel drive system," Kühn ordered. Zimmermann climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine with a single turn of the key, and shifted the transfer case lever. The action took perhaps 3 seconds. "That's all?" Kühn asked, incredulous. "Just move the lever?" "That's all, sir. Forward motion engages the front axles immediately. No stopping required, no complex procedure. A teenage conscript could master this in minutes." They drove the Jeep into soft sand that had immobilized a Kübelwagen the previous day. The German vehicle sat 20 meters away, its rear wheels buried to the axles, awaiting recovery by a tracked vehicle. The Jeep, with all 4 wheels powered, simply drove through. The difference was not dramatic. There was no rooster tail of sand, no aggressive acceleration. The vehicle just worked. It maintained traction where the Kübelwagen had lost it, powered through obstacles that had stopped German vehicles, and required no special skill from the driver. Oberst Kühn felt something cold settle in his chest. He had been a career officer for 20 years, had commanded reconnaissance units since 38. He understood the mathematics of desert warfare. The side that could move faster, reach farther, and maintain contact won engagements before the first shot was fired. This simple vehicle, with its crude engine and basic design, had just demonstrated a capability that German military doctrine assumed only tracked vehicles could achieve. "How many of these do the Americans have?" he asked quietly. Zimmermann consulted an intelligence summary. Captured serial numbers suggest production exceeding 100,000 units. That figure is from vehicles captured in the past 6 months alone. Actual production may be significantly higher, 100,000. The number defied comprehension. The entire Wehrmacht possessed perhaps 50,000 Kübelwagens, accumulated over 3 years of production. American factories were apparently building more Jeeps in 6 months than Germany had built military vehicles in 3 years. The examination continued through the afternoon. Every discovery added to a picture that became increasingly disturbing. The suspension used, simple leaf springs. German engineers would have considered this primitive, yet it worked. The springs were easy to replace, required no special tools, and could absorb punishment that would destroy the Kübelwagen's sophisticated torsion bar system. The electrical system operated on a 12-volt battery, compared to the Kübelwagen's 6-volt system. This meant the Jeep's starter motor worked reliably in cold weather, where German vehicles often failed to start. The battery itself was mounted in an accessible location, could be removed in minutes, and appeared to be a standard component used across multiple American vehicle types. Hauptmann Schmidt examined the frame with growing amazement. It was overbuilt, substantially heavier than necessary for the vehicle's weight. German engineers would have considered this wasteful, adding unnecessary mass that reduced performance and increased fuel consumption. Yet Schmidt recognized what the Americans had done. They had designed for abuse. This frame could withstand loads that would bend a Kübelwagen's chassis. It could survive rollover accidents, weapons impacts, and the kind of punishment that destroyed vehicles built to optimal specifications. "The Americans have designed this vehicle, expecting their soldiers to break it," Schmidt said wonderingly, "and then engineered it so robustly that breaking it becomes nearly impossible." By evening, the technical team had completed their initial assessment. They gathered around a folding table in Kühn's command tent, where a single kerosene lamp provided light for writing their reports. The temperature had dropped sharply with sunset, as it always did in the desert, and the officers wore their greatcoats against the chill. Kühn spoke first. "Gentlemen, I need your honest assessments. Not what you think Berlin wants to hear, not propaganda-friendly conclusions. I need to know what we're facing." There was a long silence. Finally, Schmidt cleared his throat. "Sir, the American vehicle is inferior to our Kübelwagen in several specific ways. It's heavier, uses more fuel, is slower on paved roads, and its liquid-cooled engine is more vulnerable to damage than our air-cooled design. However," Schmidt continued, his voice carefully controlled, The Jeep is superior in every way that matters for military operations. It has four-wheel drive, which we lack. It can carry heavier loads up to 800 pounds compared to our 400. It can tow artillery pieces that would overturn a Kübelwagen. Most critically, it's designed for mass production and field maintenance by soldiers with minimal training. Müller added his perspective. From a logistics standpoint, the Jeep represents a completely different philosophy. Our Kübelwagens require skilled mechanics for major repairs. Parts must be ordered through proper channels, often taking weeks to arrive. This vehicle, he gestured toward where the captured Jeep sat in darkness outside, can be repaired by any soldier with basic tools. The Americans have standardized everything. Every bolt is the same size. Every component is interchangeable. If a part breaks, you remove it and install a replacement in minutes, not hours. How many could Germany produce? Kühn asked quietly. If we decided to copy this design, how long would it take to match American output? The question hung in the air. Schmidt looked at his notes, did some mental calculations, and finally shook his head. We couldn't, sir. Not at American scale. The Jeep requires four-wheel drive systems we don't manufacture in quantity. It needs 12-volt electrical components our factories aren't equipped to produce. The engine, while simple, requires casting techniques and quality control that would demand new facilities. But if we devoted resources to it? Kühn pressed. If the Reich made this a priority? Then we might, eventually, produce 10,000 vehicles per year, Schmidt said slowly, which would represent a massive investment. The Americans are apparently producing that many in a month. The mathematics were inescapable. Kühn had spent enough time managing logistics to understand what these numbers meant. If America could produce 10 times more vehicles than Germany, with each vehicle superior in key military characteristics, then vehicle shortages would decide battles regardless of German tactical skill or soldier courage. We need to send this assessment to Berlin immediately, Kühn said. Wehrmacht High Command must understand what we're facing. This isn't just about one type of vehicle. It's about industrial capacity. If the Americans can produce Jeeps at this scale, what can they produce in tanks? In artillery? In aircraft? The reports were drafted that night, carefully worded but unflinching in their conclusions. The American Jeep represented not just a superior vehicle, but a superior production philosophy. It was designed from the start for mass manufacture by semi-skilled workers using standardized components. It prioritized reliability over sophistication, maintainability over theoretical perfection, and proven functionality over engineering elegance. More troubling still, the Jeep revealed American industrial methodology that Germany simply could not match. The United States had mobilized its entire economy for war production. Automobile factories, appliance manufacturers, and consumer goods plants had been converted to military purposes. An economy that had produced millions of cars annually now produced millions of military vehicles with the same efficiency. Germany, in contrast, had entered the war with an industrial base designed for peacetime production. Military vehicles were built by specialized manufacturers in relatively small quantities. The Kübelwagen, despite being a successful design, had been produced at a rate of perhaps 10 to 15,000 units annually. American Jeep production was, according to intelligence estimates, exceeding 20,000 per month. The reports left Tobruk on November 22nd, carried by staff car to Tripoli and then by air courier to Berlin. They would reach Wehrmacht High Command within 4 days, where they would be read, analyzed, and ultimately filed away, because the implications were too devastating to acknowledge. Because accepting that America possessed overwhelming industrial superiority meant accepting that Germany's eventual defeat was inevitable. Because changing production priorities to match American methods would require admitting that Prussian engineering pride had led the Reich into strategic disaster. But before the reports reached Berlin, events in North Africa began moving with terrible speed. On November 8th, Operation Torch had landed American and British forces in Morocco and Algeria. By November 20th, when Kühn examined the captured Jeep, Allied forces were advancing rapidly eastward, threatening to trap the Afrika Korps between advancing British forces from Egypt and American forces from the west. And everywhere the Allies appeared, jeeps led the advance. American reconnaissance units penetrated deep into German territory, mapping positions, directing artillery fire, and coordinating airstrikes. British commandos used jeeps to raid supply dumps and communication centres. Free French forces employed them to move rapidly through terrain that German intelligence had considered impassable. The captured jeep that Kühn examined was one of thousands. Serial numbers on vehicles captured throughout late 42 suggested American factories had produced over 150,000 by that point. Production was accelerating, not slowing. By the end of the war, over 640,000 would be built, more than 10 times total German Kübelwagen production. What Kühn couldn't know, examining that single vehicle in November 42, was that the Jeep represented only a small fraction of American production capacity. While his team documented four-wheel drive systems and standardized components, American factories were simultaneously producing Sherman tanks, Liberty ships, B-17 bombers, M1 rifles, and thousands of other items in quantities that would have required Germany decades to match. The industrial disparity that the Jeep revealed extended across every category of military equipment. Where Germany built one tank, America built 5. Where Germany produced one aircraft, America produced 10. Where Germany manufactured one truck, America manufactured 20. And every American item was designed for the same philosophy. The Jeep embodied mass production, standardized components, field maintainability, and overwhelming numerical superiority. As December approached and the Afrika Korps situation became increasingly desperate, Oberst Kühn found himself thinking often about that November afternoon examining the captured Jeep. He had written in his report to Berlin that the vehicle represented a fundamental difference in approach to mechanized warfare, one that prioritizes industrial output over individual vehicle superiority. What he had not written, but thought constantly, was that Germany had already lost the war. Not on any particular battlefield, not through any specific tactical failure, but in factories. American factories that could produce in months what Germany required years to manufacture. The Jeep had revealed this truth with devastating clarity. The testing continued through late November and early December. Additional captured Jeeps were examined, each one identical to the others in specifications and components. This standardization amazed the German technical officers. Every Jeep used the same engine, same transmission, same transfer case, same axles. Parts from one vehicle fit perfectly in another. This meant that maintenance units could stock a relatively small number of components and repair any Jeep in theatre. German vehicles, in contrast, often had variations between production runs. A Kübelwagen built in February might have slightly different parts than one built in June, as manufacturers modified designs or substituted components based on material availability. This made field repairs challenging, requiring mechanics to adapt parts or improvise solutions. One incident particularly impressed Müller. An American Jeep had been damaged by artillery fire, its engine destroyed beyond repair. Rather than write off the vehicle, American maintenance personnel simply removed the entire engine transmission assembly and installed a complete replacement unit in under 2 hours. The damaged engine was shipped back to a depot facility for possible salvage or disposal. German procedure would have required a skilled mechanic to assess the damage, determine which components could be salvaged, order specific replacement parts through supply channels, wait days or weeks for delivery, and then spend additional hours installing and adjusting individual components. The American approach bypassed all of this complexity through massive production capacity that allowed treating entire assemblies as disposable modules. By mid-December, Rommel's forces were retreating westward under pressure from Montgomery's 8th Army, advancing from Egypt. The situation had become critical. Fuel shortages immobilized tanks, supply lines stretched dangerously thin. Communication between units broke down, as the Africa Corps fell back across hundreds of kilometers of desert. And through it all, Kühn watched American jeeps operating everywhere along the Allied lines. They served as reconnaissance vehicles, command cars, ambulances, artillery tractors, communication platforms, and general transport. They were ubiquitous, reliable, and apparently inexhaustible. When one was destroyed or disabled, two more appeared to replace it. The retreating Wehrmacht forces tried to maintain their Kübelwagens, but the vehicles were suffering. Worn suspension components couldn't be replaced. Damaged engines awaited parts that would never arrive. Rear-wheel drive vehicles became stuck in soft sand and had to be abandoned. The Africa Corps' mobility, once its greatest advantage, was evaporating. Kühn's final report to Wehrmacht High Command was written on December 28, 1942, as the Afrika Korps established defensive positions in Tunisia. He wrote that the captured American jeeps had revealed an industrial and logistical superiority that cannot be overcome through tactical excellence or soldier determination. The enemy possesses the capacity to produce military equipment in quantities that render individual superiority irrelevant. We are facing not a better army but a better factory system. The report concluded with a recommendation that shocked even Kühn as he wrote it. If Germany is to have any chance of achieving favourable peace terms, we must immediately shift to mass production of simplified military equipment designed for rapid manufacture. Existing vehicles like the Kübelwagen, while superior in engineering, cannot be produced in sufficient quantities to matter. We need a German equivalent of the American Jeep, built in tens of thousands, not thousands. But even as he wrote these words, Kühn knew they were meaningless. Germany lacked the raw materials, the factory capacity, the trained workers, and most critically, the time to transform its industrial base. The war had been underway for over 3 years. American production was hitting peak capacity. Any German attempt to match American methods would take years to implement, and by then, the war would be decided. The response from Berlin arrived on January 15, 1943. Kühn opened the sealed envelope in his tent as artillery rumbled in the distance, the sound of another Allied bombardment against German positions near Kasserine. He read the message twice, then set it down carefully, his hands steady despite the rage building inside him. Wehrmacht High Command acknowledged his report. They agreed that the American Jeep represented impressive industrial capacity. They noted with interest the four-wheel drive system and standardized components. And then, in language carefully crafted to avoid acknowledging the real implications, they informed Kühn that Germany would continue current production priorities. The Kübelwagen program would continue unchanged. Resources could not be diverted to new vehicle development. The Reich's industrial capacity was fully committed to existing programs. In other words, nothing would change. The leadership in Berlin had read his report, understood its implications, and decided that admitting the problem was worse than ignoring it. To acknowledge American industrial superiority meant acknowledging that Germany's strategic position was hopeless. So instead, they would continue as before, producing excellent vehicles in inadequate numbers, fighting a 20th century industrial war with 19th century production methods. Kühn was not alone in his conclusions. Throughout early 1943, similar reports flooded into Wehrmacht High Command from across North Africa. Technical intelligence officers examined captured American equipment and reached identical conclusions. The Americans possessed overwhelming material superiority. Their equipment, while often less sophisticated than German equivalents, was produced in such quantities that sophistication became irrelevant. One report from Major Klaus Hartmann, stationed with the 15th Panzer Division, documented an incident that perfectly illustrated the disparity. His unit had captured an American supply dump during a brief counterattack in late January. The dump contained over 200 jeeps, still in their factory shipping crates, awaiting distribution to units. 200 vehicles, just sitting there, excess inventory that the Americans hadn't even bothered to unpack yet. Hartmann calculated that 200 jeeps represented approximately 2% of Germany's entire 1942 Kübelwagen production, just sitting unused in a single supply dump in Tunisia. He tried to imagine German logistics permitting such abundance and couldn't. Every Wehrmacht vehicle was precious, carefully tracked, maintained beyond normal service life because replacements were scarce. The Americans treated jeeps as disposable items, building so many that having hundreds in reserve was considered normal. The psychological impact of this realization spread through the Afrika Korps during those early months of 1943. German soldiers had been told they were fighting for a superior civilization with superior technology. They believed in German engineering excellence, in the inherent superiority of precision craftsmanship over American mass production. Examining captured equipment shattered these beliefs. A Gefreiter named Wilhelm Becker wrote in his diary on February 3, 1943, after his reconnaissance unit captured several American jeeps near Gafsa. "We have been lied to about American weakness. Their vehicles are everywhere, always working, never breaking down. We patch our Kübelwagens with wire and hope, while they simply get new ones when the old ones wear out. How do you fight an enemy who can replace losses faster than you can inflict them?" Becker's question had no good answer. The Afrika Korps fought with tremendous skill through the winter and early spring of 43, inflicting heavy casualties on American forces at Kasserine Pass, slowing Allied advances through superior tactics and determined resistance. But every German victory was temporary. The Allies simply brought up more men, more tanks, more supplies, and attacked again. German losses, in contrast, couldn't be replaced. Every destroyed vehicle, every killed soldier, every expended artillery shell brought the Afrika Korps closer to collapse. By March 1943, the outcome in North Africa was no longer in doubt. The Afrika Korps held a shrinking perimeter in Tunisia, supplied inadequately by sea and air, facing enemies on three sides who possessed overwhelming material superiority. Kühn, now serving as chief logistics officer for what remained of the 21st Panzer Division, spent his days performing arithmetic that always reached the same grim conclusion. His division possessed 43 operational Kübelwagens. 26 were awaiting parts that would never arrive. 17 had been completely destroyed and written off. The division had started the North African campaign 2 years earlier, with 120 vehicles. Natural attrition, enemy action, and irreparable mechanical failures had reduced that number by 2/3, and there would be no replacements. Meanwhile, intelligence reports suggested that American units facing his division possessed over 300 jeeps, with more arriving weekly. The mathematics were simple and devastating. Even if German soldiers were individually superior, and Kühn no longer believed they were drowning in American materiel. The end came in May. The Afrika Korps, surrounded and out of supplies, surrendered on May 13, 1943. Approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners. Kühn was among them, captured near Tunis. His command vehicle, a Kübelwagen that had been running on salvaged parts for 3 months, finally dead from a cracked engine block that couldn't be repaired. The journey into captivity provided yet another education in American logistics. Kühn and thousands of other prisoners were transported in American trucks, fed American rations, and processed through camps established with American efficiency. Everything was abundant. Food arrived regularly, medical supplies were plentiful. Even toilet paper, that most mundane of items, was readily available, a luxury that German forces had lacked for months. At the prisoner processing center in Oran, Algeria, Kühn encountered Hauptmann Schmidt again. The engineer had also been captured and had spent the past 2 weeks observing American logistics operations with professional fascination. They sat together in the shade of a tent, watching American supply trucks arrive in endless convoys. "I counted yesterday," Schmidt said quietly. "Between dawn and dusk, 417 military vehicles passed through this camp, 417 in a single day. At one camp, how many camps do they have? How many vehicles are moving across North Africa right now? The numbers are incomprehensible." Kühn nodded. He had been doing similar calculations. American logistics required thousands of vehicles operating continuously, each one representing industrial capacity Germany simply didn't possess. And this was just in North Africa. American forces were simultaneously fighting in the Pacific, preparing for operations in Sicily and Italy, and building up strength for an eventual invasion of France. The industrial output necessary to support operations on this scale was beyond Germany's ability to match. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. "We lost this war in 1941, Schmidt said. "The day America entered the conflict. We just didn't know it yet, or we knew it but couldn't admit it. The Jeep showed us the truth. One simple vehicle revealed an industrial gap so vast that no amount of tactical brilliance or soldier courage could bridge it." The prisoners spent the summer of 1943 in North African camps before being shipped to the United States. Kühn arrived at Camp McCain, Mississippi, in September, part of a transport of 5,000 German POWs. The journey from North Africa to America provided another revelation about Allied logistics. They crossed the Atlantic in a Liberty ship, one of the standardized cargo vessels America was producing at a rate of 3 per day. 3 ships per day. Germany's entire merchant marine had never exceeded 600 vessels, accumulated over decades. America was building that many cargo ships in 200 days, using the same mass production philosophy that created the Jeep: standardized design, prefabricated components, assembly line construction, and overwhelming output. At Camp McCain, prisoners worked in various capacities to support the war effort. Kühn, because of his engineering background and language skills, was assigned to the camp motor pool, helping maintain vehicles used by camp administration. The irony wasn't lost on him, a German officer maintaining American Jeeps while his country fought a losing war across the Atlantic. Working in the American motor pool proved educational. The sergeant in charge, a man named Bradley, who had worked in a Ford factory before the war, approached vehicle maintenance with the same pragmatic efficiency that characterized American equipment. When something broke, you replaced it. Parts were abundant. If a repair took longer than installing a replacement, you installed a replacement. Broken components went to depot maintenance for possible salvage, or were simply scrapped. Back home at the Rouge plant, Bradley told Kühn one afternoon as they changed a Jeep's transmission, "We'd build a complete vehicle from raw materials to finished product in less than 3 hours. Engine block gets cast, machined, assembled, and installed same day. By the time the body's painted and wheels are mounted, you got a Jeep ready to ship. We were doing 40, 50 units per day at our peak. 40 vehicles per day from a single factory. Germany's entire Volkswagen works at Wolfsburg had never exceeded that output, and it had been the Reich's largest vehicle manufacturer. Bradley's factory had been one of dozens producing Jeeps, and Jeeps were just one of hundreds of military items America manufactured. Kühn began to understand that he had been examining the wrong question in North Africa. He had asked whether Germany could produce vehicles like the Jeep. The real question was whether Germany could reorganize its entire industrial economy to operate like American factories operated. And the answer was clearly no. German industry was built on a model of skilled craftsmen producing quality items in moderate quantities. American industry was built on semi-skilled workers, using specialized machinery to produce standardized items in massive quantities. Neither system was inherently superior. In peacetime, German methods produced excellent products, but in total war, American methods buried Germany under a mountain of adequate equipment produced faster than it could be destroyed. The months passed, winter came to Mississippi, though nothing like the brutal winters Kühn had experienced on the Russian front years earlier. News from Europe filtered into the camp through controlled channels, American newspapers, censored mail, guards who sometimes shared information. The Allies had landed in Sicily in July 1943. Italy had surrendered in September. By January 1944, Allied forces were grinding northward through the Italian mountains, supplied by fleets of American vehicles operating on roads German engineers had considered impassable for motorized transport. In June 1944, the invasion of Normandy brought the war to France. Kühn read American newspaper accounts of the landings with professional interest and personal despair. The Allies had landed over 150,000 men in the first wave, supported by thousands of ships and aircraft. Within weeks, millions of Allied soldiers would be fighting in France, all of them supplied by a logistics system that moved thousands of tons of materiel daily. And everywhere in the photographs, jeeps, ferrying officers, towing artillery, carrying wounded, maintaining communications, serving in 1,000 roles. The vehicle he had first examined in North Africa 2 years earlier had become the symbol of Allied mobility, as common in photographs as helmets or rifles. German prisoners gathered around newspapers, reading accounts of their homeland's deteriorating situation. The Luftwaffe had been driven from the skies by swarms of American aircraft. German cities were burning under around-the-clock bombing campaigns that American industrial capacity made sustainable. The Eastern Front was collapsing as Soviet forces, supplied substantially by American equipment under Lend-Lease, pushed westward with numerical superiority that German defenders couldn't withstand. Some prisoners clung to hope. They spoke of wonder weapons being developed, of secret projects that would reverse Germany's fortunes. Kühn listened but said nothing. He had seen American industrial capacity up close. Whatever weapons Germany developed, America would produce countermeasures in greater quantity. The strategic situation was hopeless, had been hopeless since 1941, would remain hopeless until Germany accepted unconditional surrender. In December 1944, news reached the camp of a German offensive in the Ardennes, what would be called the Battle of the Bulge. Initial reports suggested German success. Prisoners allowed themselves brief hope that perhaps the war might end in negotiated peace rather than total defeat. Then additional details arrived, and Kühn felt his heart sink. The offensive had relied heavily on captured American equipment. German commandos under Otto Skorzeny had used captured jeeps to infiltrate American lines, dressed in American uniforms, speaking English, trying to cause confusion and capture bridges. The operation failed completely. The Ardennes offensive itself ground to a halt, not primarily from American resistance, though that was fierce, but because German forces ran out of fuel. Panzer divisions abandoned their tanks when supply trucks failed to arrive. The Wehrmacht, chronically short of vehicles and fuel, couldn't sustain operations even when initial attacks succeeded. Meanwhile, the Americans simply brought up more men, more tanks, more supplies, and counterattacked. By January 1945, the German offensive had been reversed. The war moved into its final phase. Spring brought the end everyone had known was coming. Soviet forces entered Berlin from the east. American and British forces crossed the Rhine and drove deep into Germany from the west. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. At Camp McCain, the news was received with mixed emotions. Relief that the killing had stopped, grief for a homeland destroyed, uncertainty about the future. Kühn sat alone that evening, thinking about the jeep he had examined in November 1942. That single vehicle had revealed the truth about how the war would end. Everything that followed the defeats in Tunisia, Sicily, Italy, France, and finally Germany itself, had been foreordained by industrial mathematics that didn't care about courage, skill, or tactical brilliance. The repatriation process began slowly. Germany was devastated, its cities in ruins, its economy collapsed, its population struggling to survive. The Allies initially kept most prisoners in camps while they dealt with more urgent priorities. Kühn remained at Camp McCain through the summer of 1945, continuing to maintain vehicles, observing American logistics, and learning lessons he hoped might someday help rebuild Germany. In September, he was transferred to a processing center in New York, awaiting shipment back to Europe. The journey north provided a final perspective on American industrial might. They travelled through the American heartland, by train, through cities and towns that showed no signs of war. Factories operated at full capacity, producing goods for civilian consumption now that military contracts were being cancelled. The American economy was transitioning from wartime to peacetime production with the same efficiency it had brought to war. In New York, Kühn stood on the dock, waiting to board a transport ship, watching vehicles being loaded for shipment to Europe as part of reconstruction efforts. American trucks, bulldozers, and yes, jeeps, were being sent to help rebuild the continent. The same industrial system that had destroyed Germany would now help resurrect it. He thought again about Schmidt's words in Oren. "We lost this war in 1941. The engineer had been right." The moment America entered the conflict with its industrial capacity fully mobilized, Germany's defeat became inevitable. No amount of fighting could overcome the mathematical reality of production ratios that favored the Allies. 10-1, 20-1, sometimes even more. The ship departed on a grey October morning. Kühn stood on deck watching the New York skyline recede, thinking about the future. Germany would have to be rebuilt from ruins. That rebuilding would require adopting some of the industrial methods that had defeated the Reich. Mass production, standardized components, efficiency over elegance. These weren't natural to German engineering culture, but the alternative was remaining in ruins while other nations prospered. He arrived in Bremen in November 1945. The city was devastated. Refugees filled the streets. Food was scarce. Hope seemed absent. But amid the ruins, work was beginning. Under Allied supervision, German workers were clearing rubble, repairing infrastructure, rebuilding factories. The process would take years, perhaps decades. But it would happen. Kühn found work with the British occupation authorities, helping organize vehicle maintenance for the Allied forces occupying northern Germany. The British, like the Americans, had massive numbers of vehicles that required constant maintenance. His experience made him valuable to occupying forces who needed German workers with mechanical expertise. The job brought him into contact with both British and American vehicles, including, inevitably, jeeps. The same design he had first examined 3 years earlier in North Africa now served occupation forces in Germany. Some were new, fresh from American factories. Others showed wear from years of service across multiple theatres. All of them still worked, still ran, still performed their missions with the reliability he had documented in his reports to Wehrmacht High Command. By 1947, Kühn had been hired by a German automotive company that was beginning to rebuild its operations. The company, like many in Germany, was studying American manufacturing methods, trying to understand how to produce vehicles efficiently enough to compete in post-war markets. Kühn's experience examining American equipment made him valuable as a consultant. He helped design production systems that incorporated American principles, standardization, interchangeable parts, simplified assembly processes, quality control through statistical methods rather than individual inspection. The German workers initially resisted these methods. They had been trained in traditional craftsmanship, taking pride in individual skill and precision. Mass production seemed like a betrayal of German engineering excellence. Kühn understood their resistance. He had felt the same way examining the Jeep in '42. "The Americans didn't beat us with better engineering," he told his colleagues in a meeting in 1948. "They beat us with better production. One of their vehicles might not be as precisely built as one of ours, but they could build 10 of theirs in the time we built one of ours. In war, 10 adequate vehicles beat one perfect vehicle every time." The lesson, hard learned through defeat, gradually took hold. German manufacturers began adopting American methods while maintaining German attention to quality. The synthesis proved powerful. By the 1950s, West German manufacturing was producing vehicles that combined American production efficiency with German engineering precision. Companies like Volkswagen, the same company that had produced the Kübelwagen, became global exporters, selling millions of vehicles built with lessons learned from studying American industrial methods. The Volkswagen Beetle, which became one of history's best-selling automobiles, embodied this synthesis. It was simple, reliable, manufacturable in huge quantities, and affordable for average families. It incorporated design principles that Ferdinand Porsche had used in the Kübelwagen, but executed with American-influenced mass production techniques that made it profitable and accessible. In 1952, Kühn published a paper in a German engineering journal titled Industrial Lessons from the American Jeep. The paper, based on his wartime examinations and post-war experience, documented how the Jeep represented a fundamental shift in manufacturing philosophy. He argued that future success in global markets would require combining German precision with American production efficiency. The paper attracted attention from both academic and industrial audiences. Kühn was invited to speak at conferences, consult with manufacturers, and teach at technical schools. His wartime experience, once a source of shame and defeat, became valuable knowledge for rebuilding Germany's industrial base. By the 1960s, West Germany had become an economic powerhouse. The economic miracle transformed the nation from devastated ruins to one of Europe's strongest economies. German manufacturers exported vehicles, machinery, and consumer goods globally. The success owed much to lessons learned from defeat, lessons that men, like Kühn, had documented examining American equipment during the war. In 1967, 25 years after examining that first Jeep in North Africa, Kühn attended a reunion of former Afrika Korps veterans. Fewer than 100 men came, survivors of the 250,000 who had been captured in Tunisia. They shared memories, remembered fallen comrades, and reflected on how the war had changed them. Someone mentioned the American Jeep, and several veterans nodded knowingly. They all remembered those vehicles ubiquitous, reliable, the symbol of American material superiority. Kühn shared his story of examining the captured vehicle in November 1942 and how that examination had revealed the mathematical certainty of Germany's defeat. "We were trying to fight an industrial war with pre-industrial methods," he said. "The Jeep showed us that. One simple vehicle designed for mass production revealed the entire strategic situation. We just couldn't admit what we were seeing." An old Gefreiter, who had served in a reconnaissance unit, added, "I remember trying to keep our Kübelwagens running in the last months. We cannibalized parts from destroyed vehicles, improvised repairs with wire and welding, pushed vehicles until they literally fell apart. Meanwhile, the Americans just got new ones. They had so many vehicles they could afford to abandon damaged ones rather than repair them. That's when you know you've lost, when the enemy treats as disposable what you consider precious." The reunions continued through the 70s and 80s, with fewer attendees each year as veterans aged and died. Kühn attended when he could, until his health made travel difficult. He died in 1994 at age 83, having lived to see Germany reunited, prosperous, and fully integrated into the community of nations that had once been its enemies. His obituary in a German automotive industry journal noted his contributions to post-war industrial development and his role in helping German manufacturers adopt modern production methods. It mentioned, almost as an aside, his wartime service and his examinations of captured American equipment, but perhaps the most fitting memorial came from a lecture Kühn gave at a technical university in 1986, speaking to engineering students about industrial history. He told them about the Jeep, about what it revealed, about how examining one simple vehicle had exposed the fundamental reasons for Germany's defeat. "The lesson," he told the students, "is not that American engineering was superior to German engineering. In many ways it wasn't. The lesson is that in modern industrial warfare, production capacity matters more than individual excellence. The side that can build more equipment, faster, wins. This seems obvious now, but in 1942 it wasn't obvious to us. We believed quality would triumph over quantity. We were wrong." He concluded, "When you design products in the future, remember this. Elegant engineering that cannot be manufactured at scale is less valuable than adequate engineering that can be produced in massive quantities." The Americans understood this in 1942. It took us years of defeat to learn the same lesson. Don't repeat our mistake. The students listened respectfully, taking notes, probably not fully understanding how hard-won this knowledge had been. They lived in a world where German automobiles were admired globally, where made in Germany meant quality and reliability. They couldn't imagine the ruins from which that reputation had been rebuilt, couldn't comprehend the mathematics of defeat that had taught their predecessors these lessons. But Kühn remembered. He remembered standing in the North African desert, examining an American Jeep, and slowly, painfully, understanding what it meant. He remembered writing reports that went unheeded, warnings that were ignored, conclusions that leadership refused to accept. He remembered watching American vehicles everywhere during his captivity, monuments to an industrial capacity Germany could never match. And he remembered the fundamental truth that the Jeep had revealed. Modern warfare is decided not on battlefields, but in factories. The nation with greater industrial capacity, properly organized and directed, will overwhelm any opponent, regardless of tactical skill or soldier courage. This truth, purchased at the cost of Germany's total defeat, became the foundation of post-war German industrial philosophy and helped create the economic success that followed. The Jeep itself, that simple vehicle that had revealed so much, remained in production long after the war. The design evolved, but its fundamental principles, four-wheel drive, standardized components, reliability, maintainability, remained constant. It served in Korea, Vietnam, and countless other conflicts. It became a civilian vehicle, spawning an entire category of recreational, four-wheel drive vehicles. The Jeep had outlasted the war, outlasted the soldiers who had built and driven it, outlasted even the nation that had built it, as the United States that produced Jeeps in 1942 transformed into something quite different by century's end. But the lessons it taught remained relevant: industrial capacity, mass production, standardization. These principles, demonstrated by a simple military vehicle in the deserts of North Africa, shaped the post-war world. They influenced not just German industry but global manufacturing. They helped create the modern economy where products are designed for efficient production and distributed globally in massive quantities. Friedrich Kühn, examining a captured Jeep on November 20, 1942, couldn't have imagined all of this. He was just trying to understand why American forces were so mobile, why Allied logistics seemed inexhaustible, why every engagement revealed German vehicles outnumbered 10-1. The simple vehicle he examined that day provided answers he hadn't wanted to find, answers that revealed Germany had already lost a war it would fight for 2.5 more years. The mathematics had been clear from the start. Germany's industrial capacity could never match America's. No amount of tactical brilliance, no wonder weapons, no soldier determination could overcome ratios of 10-1, 20-1, sometimes even more. The Jeep was just one manifestation of this disparity, but it was the one Kühn examined closely enough to understand completely. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.